The night was quiet, but Keanu Reeves sat by his window with a restlessness he could not shake. Outside, the city lights flickered like small stars, yet his heart was heavy. He had turned 61 only a few days ago, a milestone that reminded him of everything he had lost and everything he still carried. Birthdays for him had always been simple, quiet affairs. He never wanted the spotlight, never wanted the noise of Hollywood attention. But this year felt different, and he didn't know why. Keanu had spent his life trying to live humbly. He gave away much of what he earned, helped strangers in silence, and often slipped through life unnoticed despite his fame. Yet deep inside, he still carried scars. Scars from grief, from loneliness, from the endless search for peace. And when the world celebrated him, he often felt undeserving. Then came the message. It was from Sandra Bullock, his dear friend of decades. Their bond had always been special. Born on a film set long ago, tested by time, distance, and the weight of fame, but never broken. Her words were simple: meet me tomorrow. No excuses. He smiled faintly when he read it. Sandra was the kind of person who never asked without reason. Her timing was precise, her gestures always carrying meaning. And so, without question, he agreed. The next day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Keanu arrived at the address Sandra had given him. To his surprise, it wasn't a restaurant or a glamorous hall. It was an old community theater tucked into a quiet street, the kind of place where dreams once began but had long been forgotten by the city. He stepped inside, and his breath caught. The theater was dimly lit, rows of seats filled not with celebrities or reporters but with ordinary people, families, children, elderly men and women, all waiting quietly, their eyes fixed on the stage. Keanu walked slowly to the front row, confused but curious. Sandra was waiting for him there, her smile gentle but her eyes shining with something deeper. "You're here," she said softly. "Of course," he replied, still unsure of what was unfolding. The lights dimmed further, and then the screen on stage came alive. What Keanu saw stunned him. It was not a film premiere. It was not a tribute from Hollywood. It was a reel of his life, but not the parts the world had seen. There were no red carpets, no interviews, no blockbusters. Instead, it was filled with quiet, hidden moments no one ever talked about. A clip of him sitting on the sidewalk years ago, sharing food with a man who had nothing. A recording of him helping crew members behind the scenes, lifting heavy equipment when no one else offered. Photographs of him quietly donating books to libraries, visiting children's hospitals without cameras, paying bills for strangers who never even knew it was him. Keanu's eyes widened. He had never wanted these acts to be seen. To him, they were not acts of charity. They were just life, the way he believed people should live. Yet here they were, projected before a room full of strangers. He looked at Sandra, his voice trembling. "What is this?" She placed her hand on his arm. "This is you, Keanu. The man the world deserves to know. Not the actor, not the star. The man who changes lives without asking for credit." As the clips continued, one by one, the audience began to react. Some wiped away tears. Others leaned forward, whispering to one another in awe. The room was filled not with noise, but with the quiet power of respect. Keanu lowered his head, his eyes burning. He was not used to this kind of attention. He never wanted his kindness to be measured or displayed. Yet at the same time, seeing the effect it had on these people stirred something deep inside him. But then the screen shifted, and Keanu froze. It was not just strangers now. It was a voice he knew, a voice from the past, someone he thought he would never hear again. The sound filled the theater, gentle and familiar, and Keanu's heart stopped. The theater grew still, every sound fading as the familiar voice filled the room. Keanu's breath caught in his throat, his hands trembling against his knees. He knew that voice. It was his late mother's. Her words were soft, recorded long ago, but they reached straight into his heart. "My son," she said gently, "you have always carried the weight of others with quiet strength. Life will test you. It will take more than you think you can give. But promise me one thing, never lose your kindness. It is your greatest gift, and the world needs it more than anything." Tears welled in Keanu's eyes. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his chest rising and falling as though he had run a marathon. The memories of her came flooding back, the comfort of her embrace, the way she always told him to stay humble no matter how big his world became, the endless lessons she gave in small, simple words. Sandra reached over, resting her hand lightly on his arm. "I found this," she whispered, "and I knew it belonged here tonight." Keanu nodded, unable to speak. His throat was too tight, his emotions too raw. The reel continued, showing more unseen acts of kindness from his past. But now, with his mother's voice still echoing inside him, everything felt sharper, more meaningful. Her words had given context to every action. It was as though she was still guiding him, even after all these years. The audience sat in silence, many wiping their eyes. They weren't watching a Hollywood star anymore. They were witnessing a man shaped by loss, by humility, by a love that had never left him. As the lights dimmed and the reel ended, Sandra stepped onto the stage. She looked out at the audience, then back at Keanu. "Tonight," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "is not just about celebrating a birthday. It is about celebrating a man who has given the world more than it realizes." Keanu never asks for recognition, never seeks applause, but I believe we should honor not the actor we see on screen, but the human being who walks among us quietly, changing lives with every step. The crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation, clapping not with frenzy but with reverence. Keanu lowered his head, overcome, his tears finally slipping free. But just as he thought the night had reached its peak, Sandra turned back to him with a smile that held both love and mystery. "There's one more thing, Keanu," she said softly. "Something I've kept hidden until tonight." Keanu lifted his head slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "What is it?" he whispered. Sandra hesitated, her eyes glistening under the soft lights. Then she said, "I want to show you something. Something that may change the way you see yourself forever." The room grew still again. The crowd sensed the shift, leaning forward in their seats. Keanu's heart pounded harder, unsure of what Sandra was about to reveal. And in that moment, the night that had already left him speechless was about to take another turn he never expected. The audience sat in hushed silence as Sandra's words echoed through the old theater. Keanu's eyes locked on hers, searching for answers in the small smile she wore. He felt both nervous and curious, unsure if he was ready for whatever she was about to show him. Sandra stepped off the stage and motioned for the crew to dim the lights again. The screen flickered, and for a moment the room was dark. Then an image appeared, an old photograph worn at the edges but filled with warmth. Keanu gasped softly. It was a picture of him and Sandra in their early years, taken during the filming of Speed. They were laughing together, carefree and young. But it wasn't just the photo that mattered. Written across the bottom in faded handwriting were the words, "Friends are the family we choose." The photo dissolved, and more images began to appear. Not from magazines, not from movie sets, but from private collections. Photos of Keanu in moments no one had ever seen before. Keanu sitting quietly in a hospital waiting room beside a stranger who had no family. Keanu visiting schools, speaking softly to children without cameras around. Keanu handing food to workers on set, always unnoticed, always in the background. He looked at Sandra in shock. How do you have these?" Sandra's eyes softened. "People remember the little things, Keanu. Over the years, so many lives you touched quietly. They never forgot. I reached out and they shared their stories, their pictures. Tonight, I wanted you to see the world through their eyes." Keanu's throat tightened. The screen filled with short video clips now, testimonies of strangers, each telling how Keanu had touched their lives. A woman's voice cracked as she said, "When I lost my husband, Keanu sat beside me at the funeral. I wasn't anyone important, but he stayed until the last candle went out." A young man appeared, smiling nervously. "He paid for my college books when I couldn't. I never even got to thank him in person." An older man spoke next. "I was homeless once. He gave me his coat in the middle of winter. I didn't even know who he was until later." Each story was a wave crashing over Keanu, his eyes filled with tears he couldn't hold back. The audience sat motionless, touched by every word, every small act that painted a picture of who Keanu truly was. Not the star, but the man. Sandra turned to him, her own voice trembling. "Do you see, Keanu? The world may know you as an actor, but these people know you as a blessing. You think your kindness goes unnoticed, but it has built a legacy stronger than any film." Keanu pressed his hands over his face, overwhelmed. "I never wanted recognition," he whispered. "I know," Sandra replied softly. "And that's what makes it so powerful. True kindness doesn't seek the spotlight, but tonight, it deserves to be seen." The audience erupted again into applause, but this time it wasn't for entertainment. It was for humanity. Keanu remained seated, his shoulders shaking as tears fell freely. Yet even as he tried to compose himself, the screen suddenly shifted once more. This time it wasn't a photo or a stranger's testimony. It was a sealed letter. Sandra looked at him carefully. This is the part I wasn't sure you were ready for, but I believe it's time. Keanu's heart pounded. He stared at the letter on the screen, his body frozen. What is it? He asked, his voice low and trembling. Sandra hesitated, then whispered, It's from someone you thought you had lost forever. The theater fell silent again. The suspense thick in the air. Keanu's pulse raced, his chest tightening. He didn't know if he had the strength to hear what came next, but he knew he had no choice. The image of the sealed letter stayed on the screen, glowing faintly in the dim theater. Keanu felt as if the room had grown smaller, the walls pressing closer with every beat of his heart. His hands trembled in his lap and he could barely find his voice. Who is it from? He whispered, his throat dry. Sandra stepped closer, her expression soft but heavy. Your mother, she said gently. She left this letter years ago and it somehow found its way to me. I wasn't sure if I should give it to you. I was afraid it would hurt more than heal. But after tonight, after hearing her voice again, I knew you were ready. Keanu's breath caught. He closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling unevenly. A letter. From her? He muttered, almost in disbelief. Sandra nodded and gave a small signal. The screen faded and an envelope appeared in her hands. She walked slowly to him, the silence of the audience wrapping around them like a blanket. Every step felt like the weight of years being carried forward. She handed him the envelope, her fingers brushing his for a moment. Take your time, she whispered. Keanu stared at the envelope. The handwriting on it was unmistakable. His mother's graceful script, simple but filled with love. His fingers traced the letters of his name written across the front. His eyes burned with tears before he even opened it. Finally, with shaking hands, he slid the paper out. His voice cracked as he began to read aloud, though soft enough that only the front rows could hear. My dear son, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. I know you will carry pain because you always carry the weight of others, and I fear you will hide too much of your own. Please remember this, you are not alone even when you feel like it. People will come into your life who will remind you of love, who will walk beside you when the road feels unbearable. Let them. Don't close your heart, and never forget. The kindness you give will always return to you in ways you cannot imagine. By the time he reached the last line, Keanu could no longer hold back his tears. The letter shook in his hands as his voice broke completely. You are my greatest gift to this world, and I am proud of you. Always. Keanu lowered the letter, covering his face with his hands. His shoulders trembled, his heart breaking and healing at the same time. The audience remained silent, many in tears themselves, moved by the rawness of the moment. Sandra knelt beside him, wrapping her arm gently around his shoulders. She was right, Keanu, she whispered. You've carried so much for others, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore. He turned to her, his eyes red but shining. Why would you do all this for me? He asked, his voice hoarse. Sandra smiled through her own tears. Because you've spent your life giving to everyone else. Someone had to give back, and because you're my friend, and I promised myself I would always remind you of who you are when you forget. Keanu closed his eyes, overwhelmed by gratitude and grief all at once. He realized this night wasn't just a tribute, it was a message, a reminder that even in his silence, he was seen, loved, and needed. But deep in his heart, another thought formed. His mother's words about kindness returning in ways he could not imagine. He didn't yet understand what that meant, but soon he would. Because Sandra's gesture, as beautiful as it was only the beginning. The theater lights remained dim, and Keanu still held the letter close to his chest. It felt like a piece of his mother's heart had traveled through time, just to reach him in this very moment. The audience sat in silence, many wiping their eyes as if they too had been invited into something sacred. But Sandra knew the night could not end there. She stood again and addressed the crowd. What you've seen tonight is not just a story about one man, she said gently. It is a reminder to all of us that kindness is never wasted. Every act, no matter how small, ripples outward and touches lives we may never know. The screen behind her flickered once more, and a new series of clips appeared. This time, they were messages from strangers across the world, people who had been inspired by Keanu's quiet kindness. A woman in a hospital bed smiled weakly into the camera. When I was sick and no one came to visit, he did. He sat with me for an hour and I never forgot. A young man appeared next, his voice unsteady. I was homeless. He gave me food. He didn't know my name, but I remember his face. I survived that winter because of him. A little girl spoke last, her voice bright and innocent. He gave me a doll when I was sad. I still have it. It makes me feel brave. Keanu's eyes widened. He didn't remember some of these moments. They had been so small to him, so ordinary, yet here they were. Lives changed because of them. The audience erupted into soft applause, touched by the testimonies. But then something unexpected happened. A man rose from the back row holding a microphone. His voice shook as he spoke. "Mr. Reeves, I don't know if you remember me," he said, "but years ago you sat next to me in a coffee shop when I had just lost my job. You didn't say much, but your words, 'Don't give up, tomorrow is kinder,' kept me from ending my life that night. I am here today because of you." The room went silent. Keanu froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He had spoken those words casually, not realizing they had saved a life. His tears returned, falling freely as he placed a hand over his mouth, speechless. Sandra walked to the man and embraced him, then turned to Keanu. "This is what your mother meant," she said softly. "The kindness you give returns to you in ways you cannot imagine." Keanu shook his head slowly, overwhelmed. I never thought," he whispered. "You didn't need to," Sandra interrupted gently. "That's the beauty of it. You never asked for credit, and that is why your kindness shines brighter than fame." The audience stood again, this time in a roaring standing ovation. Not for the actor, not for the celebrity, but for the man who had lived his life quietly, proving that humanity mattered more than glory. Keanu lowered his gaze, humbled to the point of breaking. He had lived with grief, with loss, with the belief that his life was just about surviving. But here in this old theater, he saw proof that his existence had created waves of hope he never even knew about. Sandra leaned toward him and whispered, "You see, Keanu, you thought you walked this road alone, but you never did. Your mother was right. The world needs your heart, and you've been giving it all along." His tears blurred the crowd, but in that blur, he saw something he had not felt in years: peace. Yet, just as he began to calm, a voice came from backstage. "There's one last surprise." The lights shifted, the curtain moved, and Keanu turned in shock as someone stepped forward, someone connected to his past in a way that would leave him completely speechless. The curtain shifted slowly, the sound of fabric brushing against the wooden floor echoing in the quiet theater. Keanu's heart raced. He had already been through so much that night: memories, letters, voices from the past, and stories he never knew he had inspired. But this moment felt different. The air was thick with anticipation. From behind the curtain, a woman stepped forward. She was older, with gentle eyes that carried both warmth and sorrow. For a moment, Keanu could not place her. Then, as she moved closer into the light, recognition struck him like lightning. His breath caught. "Aunt Maria," he whispered. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "Yes, Keanu. It's me." Keanu stood abruptly, the letter from his mother still clutched in his hand. I thought you were gone," he said, his voice trembling. Aunt Maria shook her head softly. "I stayed away. After your mother passed, I thought you needed distance, not more reminders of the pain. But I never stopped watching, never stopped caring. Sandra reached out to me. She told me tonight was about healing, and I knew I had to be here." Keanu covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook as years of hidden grief poured out of him. When he lowered his hands, his aunt was standing right before him. He embraced her tightly, the crowd watching in silence as nephew and aunt clung to one another. Sandra stood off to the side, her eyes glistening with pride and relief. She had given her dearest friend not just a tribute, but a chance to reconnect with the only family he had left. When the applause finally broke out, it was thunderous, not for a performance, but for a moment of pure humanity. People wiped tears from their eyes, moved not by fame, but by love, humility, and reunion. Keanu turned back to the audience, his voice unsteady but strong. "I don't have many words," he admitted, "but I will say this. My life has been filled with loss, with silence, with moments where I thought I had nothing left to give. But tonight, I realize I was wrong, because kindness is never wasted. It finds its way back through strangers, through friends, through family you thought you lost." His aunt took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Your mother would be proud," she whispered. Keanu smiled faintly through his tears. "She always believed in kindness. I only hope I've lived in a way that honors her." Sandra stepped forward then, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You've done more than honor her, Keanu. You've reminded the world what it means to be human. The audience rose once more in a standing ovation, but Keanu barely noticed. His focus was on the two women who had given him this night. One a lifelong friend who refused to let him forget his worth, and the other a long-lost family member who reminded him he was never truly alone. As the curtain fell and the lights dimmed, Keanu closed his eyes and whispered his mother's words to himself one last time. Kindness is never wasted, and for the first time in many years he believed it with all his heart.